Once upon a time, in a collection of islands famous for its suspiciously grey skies and a constant gentle drizzle, there wasn't a united kingdom at all. Oh no, that would have been far too simple and organised. Instead, there was a mishmash of kingdoms, tribes and angry farmers who mostly communicated by shouting at each other across muddy fields. Imagine a school playground where four very different children are forced to share the same wobbly seesaw, and you're halfway there. Each one thought they were the most important, had the best snacks and deserved the entire playground to themselves. This wasn't a land of polite handshakes and cups of tea just yet. It was a land of spectacular arguments, questionable haircuts, and a shared, deep-seated suspicion of sunshine. The whole place was a bit of a geographical muddle. You had England, big and bossy, convinced it was the head teacher of the playground. Then there was Wales, a land of singers, poets and people who could pronounce words with far too many L's and W's. To the north you had Scotland, a feisty, independent character who wore kilts even when it was freezing and was brilliant at inventing things like golf and deep-fried chocolate bars. And across a choppy bit of sea was Ireland, a beautiful green island full of storytellers and rebels who mostly wanted to be left alone to enjoy the peace and quiet. These weren't friends, they were neighbours, and like all neighbours, they spent most of their time borrowing sugar and plotting to steal each other's parking spaces. Before we get to the united part, you have to understand the not-so-united part, which lasted for, ages and ages. For centuries, these lands were more like a bag of angry cats than a proper kingdom. They fought wars over everything: land, sheep, who had the best-looking king, and whether you should put jam or cream on a scone first, a debate that still causes punch-ups today. Roman invaders came and went, leaving behind some very straight roads and a newfound appreciation for central heating. Then the Vikings popped over for a spot of pillaging, which was terribly rude but did give everyone some excellent horned helmets for fancy dress parties later on. The whole place was a chaotic, bubbling stew of different people, languages and seriously bad weather. And let's talk about that weather. It was, and still is, the great unifier and the great complainer. Rain was the default setting. A sunny day was so rare and shocking that people would stumble out of their huts, blinking at the strange yellow orb in the sky and wondering if it was a sign of the apocalypse. This constant dampness seeped into their bones, their food and their personalities. It's why they became experts at building castles with drafty corridors and inventing 100 different words for drizzle. It's also probably why they invented tea. You needed something warm to hold while you stared out of a window watching your prize-winning cabbages slowly float away in a flood. This soggy backdrop is where our story of a kingdom begins. First up, let's properly introduce England. Imagine the biggest, loudest kid in the class. The one who always puts their hand up even when they don't know the answer. That was England. It was rich, mostly from nicking things from other countries, had the biggest army, and was absolutely convinced that its way of doing things was the only correct way. The English spoke a language that was a bizarre jumble of German, French, and Latin, German, French, Latin. They were obsessed with building enormous cathedrals and having kings with ridiculous names like Ethelred the Unready. His name literally meant noble counsel, the no counsel. England's master plan was simple: get everyone else to be more like them, preferably without too much fuss. Then you have the Welsh, the original Britons who were here long before the English barged in. They were pushed into the hilly, rugged western corner of the island, a place so beautiful and mysterious that it's probably where dragons went for their summer holidays. The Welsh were famous for their poetry, their magnificent singing voices that could shatter glass at 50 paces, and their language, which looked like a cat had walked across a keyboard. They built magnificent castles because the English kept trying to invade. They became experts in defensive architecture. They were the grumpy but artistic older sibling. Annoyed England kept trying to borrow their stuff and change their name to something easier to spell. To the north, across a border that was more of a squiggly line of mutual grumpiness, lived the Scots. Scotland was the tough, rebellious sibling, brilliant at engineering and arguing. The Scots were proud, hardy people who could survive on a diet of oats, porridge and distilled fire, whiskey. They spent centuries telling the English to get lost, often with the help of a very pointy spear called a pike. They invented useful things like the telephone, the television, and also the haggis. It tastes better than it sounds. Don't ever call a Scot English. It's a mistake you only make once. And finally, across the Irish Sea, we have Ireland, the Emerald Isle. A land so green and lovely it looked like it had been painted by a cheerful giant. The Irish were a nation of poets, saints, scholars, and world-class storytellers. For a long, long time they were left to their own devices, creating beautiful art and writing incredible myths. Then England decided it wanted to be in charge of Ireland too. This was the start of a very long, very complicated, and often very unhappy relationship. Like a terrible marriage, nobody could figure out how to end. The Irish were dragged into the family drama, bringing a sharp wit, a rebellious spirit, and a talent for making music that could make you cry. The first country to get officially lassoed into England's grand plan was Wales. This wasn't a friendly merger with paperwork and a celebratory cake. It was more like a hostile takeover. For hundreds of years, Welsh princes had been successfully dodging English kings, hiding in their mountain fortresses and occasionally popping out to cause a bit of chaos. They had heroes like Owain Glyndwr, a Welsh nobleman who led a massive rebellion, and was the last native Welshman to hold the title Prince of Wales. He was a bit of a legend. Some say he was a wizard who could control the weather, which would have been very handy for making it rain extra hard whenever the English army showed up for a fight. But England was persistent. King Edward I, a man with a magnificent beard and a terrible temper, nicknamed Longshanks because of his long legs. He was determined to bring Wales under his control. He got so fed up with the rebellious Welsh, decided on a brutally simple plan: build more castles than they had sheep. He built a ring of enormous, terrifying stone castles all along the coast of North Wales. Conwy, Caernarfon, Harlech. These weren't cosy homes. They were giant stone bullies, designed to loom over the landscape and remind the Welsh exactly who was boss. It was the medieval equivalent of building a multi-storey car park right in front of your neighbour's prize-winning rose garden. The final piece of the puzzle was a bit of a trick. According to legend, Edward promised the Welsh leaders he would give them a new Prince of Wales, one who was born in Wales and couldn't speak a single word of English. The Welsh chiefs, thinking they'd get one of their own, agreed. Edward then cheekily presented them with his newborn son, Edward II, born in Caernarfon Castle. He was technically born in Wales, and as a baby he certainly couldn't speak any English. The Welsh were furious, feeling utterly cheated, but the tradition stuck. Ever since, the eldest son of the English monarch has often been given the title Prince of Wales, a constant nagging reminder of how they were absorbed into the family. So in 1536 the deal was sealed with the Laws in Wales Acts. This officially bolted Wales onto England, making them one legal entity. It was supposed to make everyone equal, but it mostly meant that Welsh laws were abolished, and English became the official language of government, much to the annoyance of people who preferred words like Caerdydd, a lovely hug, and Harath, a deep longing for home. And so, Wales became the first non-English part of what would eventually become the United Kingdom. It joined not with a cheer, but with a long, drawn-out groan and a muttered complaint about the new neighbours and their ridiculously oversized castle. Now, you'd think England would just march north and do the same thing to Scotland. They certainly tried, for centuries. The Anglo-Scottish relationship was mostly about enthusiastic attempts at bashing each other's heads in. The Scots, under heroes like William Wallace, yes, the one from the movie, but he probably didn't wear face paint, and Robert the Bruce, got very good at beating the English. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. A massive, confident English army turned up, expecting an easy win. And the canny Scots, though outnumbered, sent them packing with their tails between their legs. It was a national humiliation for England and a source of immense pride for Scotland that they still sing songs about today. This meant Scotland couldn't be conquered by force. They were too stubborn, too smart, and their country was full of pointy mountains and gloomy lochs that were perfect for ambushes. So, how did they end up in a union with their old enemy? It all happened because of a very awkward family problem, babies, or rather, a lack of them. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth I of England died. She was known as the Virgin Queen because she never married or had any children. This was a huge problem. Who was going to take over? The English lords looked around nervously, shuffling through the royal family tree, and realized the next person in line was... oh dear. It was her cousin, King James VI of Scotland. James packed his bags, said goodbye to the rain and midges of Scotland, and moved down to the rain and smog of London, becoming King James I of England and Ireland as well. This moment is called the Union of the Crowns. It's important to remember that this did not create Great Britain. It just meant that one bloke was wearing two different crowns, like having two jobs at once. Scotland and England were still separate countries with their own parliaments, laws and churches. They just happened to share a boss, which must have made for some very confusing meetings. James I was a big fan of uniting the two kingdoms properly. He even invented the name Great Britain and designed a new flag, the Union Jack, by squishing the English flag of St. George, a red cross on a white background, and the Scottish flag of St. Andrew, a white diagonal cross on a blue background. Together, most people, especially in Scotland, hated the idea. They were perfectly happy being separate. They didn't want to merge with their noisy, bossy southern neighbours. So, for another 100 years, the two countries remained stubbornly separate, like two people forced to share a house who refused to speak to each other and draw a chalk line down the middle of the hallway. So, what finally pushed Scotland and England into getting properly married? Money and a disastrous plan involving hats. Well, not just hats. At the end of the 17th century, Scotland was having a tough time. It was poorer than England. It wanted a slice of the lucrative global trade pie. So a group of very optimistic Scottish politicians and merchants came up with the Darien scheme. The plan was to set up a Scottish colony in Panama in a place called Darien and build a trading post that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. They imagined ships loaded with Scottish goods like wool linen, making them fabulously rich. It was a brilliant idea, on paper. Unfortunately, the reality was a complete and utter catastrophe. The Scots poured a huge amount of their national wealth into the scheme, something like a quarter of all the money in Scotland. They hadn't counted on tropical diseases, the swampy terrain, the hostile Spanish who already claimed the land, and the fact that England had forbidden its own colonies from helping the Scots. The colonists died in droves from malaria, starvation, and the whole project collapsed, bankrupting Scotland in the process. It was a national disaster of epic proportions, like losing all your money on a single, very sweaty horse. This is where England spotted its chance. Scotland was broke, desperate, humbled. The English politicians came knocking with an offer. How about we form a proper union? We'll pay off all your debts from that silly Panama idea, and in return, we'll become one big, happy country called Great Britain. You'll get access to our trading routes, and we'll finally have you under our thumb. What do you say? This offer caused riots in the streets of Edinburgh. Most ordinary Scots were absolutely furious. They saw it as selling their country for English gold. The famous Scottish poet Robert Burns later wrote that they were bought and sold for English gold. He was not a happy chap. Despite the public outrage, the Scottish Parliament, made up of nobles who were promised money, who were promised cushy jobs, or who were genuinely scared of an English invasion, if they said no, voted in favour. And so in 1707 the Acts of Union were passed. The Scottish and English parliaments were dissolved, and a new Parliament of Great Britain was created in London. Scotland kept its own legal system and its church, but it was no longer a fully independent state. The Kingdom of Great Britain was born. It wasn't a union of love, it was more like a marriage of convenience, where one partner was rich and smug and the other was broke and resentful. A perfect start to a long and complicated relationship.